Israel has started a full-fledged war in Gaza, trying to eradicate Hamas but eventually killing thousands of civilians. During this time when the world has divided, African countries are focusing on the roots of the problem. The reason why Hamas entered Israel's territory is the decades of atrocities Israel carried out, occupying the land which once belonged to Palestinians. From 1947 to now, Palestinians have been living like second- and third-class citizens, having no land of their own. However, instead of resolving this root issue, countries are supporting Israel, and with it, the attack in Gaza as well. However, the president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, said something which Israel and the international community must follow to end the conflict. Without caring whether his words would be liked by the West or not, he condemned the war crimes and attacks on civilians, no matter which side was carrying them out. Then he presented a solution, which has created waves in the West and Israel. What did he say, and with which country South Africa is standing in this conflict? Let's know about it. In a series of media talks, speeches, and public appearances, the South African president has been vocal about the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa conveyed his solidarity with Palestinians. That's because no matter which country and organization you are representing, you have to side with the good against the evil. In this case, the killing of thousands of innocent civilians and the bombing of hospitals can never be considered normal. He stressed the significance of implementing the two-state solution, which entails the creation of an independent Palestinian state. Ramaphosa also expressed his condolences to the families affected by recent clashes in both the Gaza Strip and Israel. Regarding the Israeli directive to relocate people from northern Gaza to the southern areas, he voiced concerns about the potential exacerbation of the situation. He underlined South Africa's support for the Palestinian people and their pursuit of a peaceful resolution to the conflict, emphasizing that such a resolution would have positive ripple effects throughout the Middle East. President Ramaphosa called for a negotiation process led by the United Nations to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He emphasized the international community's responsibility to foster peace and facilitate conditions for dialogue. These remarks were made during the Cairo Summit for Peace, where discussions revolved around the escalating conflict in Israel and the Gaza Strip, along with the urgent need for humanitarian assistance. He stressed the South African government's stance on the matter, viewing attacks on civilians in Israel, the Gaza siege, and the forced relocation of Gaza's population as violations of international law. He called for an immediate halt to hostilities, the release of hostages, the lifting of the Gaza blockade, the establishment of humanitarian corridors, and the provision of humanitarian aid to Gaza. You should know that at present, Israeli forces have cut off all food, water, electricity, and other necessities supplied to Gaza. Millions of civilians in Gaza are longing for food and water, but Israel is steadfast not to uplift the blockade. This calls for international attention at every cost, which the South African president pointed toward. President Ramaphosa drew parallels between the Palestinian struggle and South Africa's fight against apartheid, highlighting the significance of pursuing peace rather than seeking revenge. He emphasized that peace is the sole viable option to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and called on all parties to exercise restraint while urging states to refrain from supplying weapons to either side. He expressed concerns that the Israeli government's response to attacks on its citizens could further intensify the conflict, making the achievement of a just and enduring peace even more challenging. He advocated for fulfilling the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people, including their human rights, dignity, and statehood, by United Nations decisions that endorse statehood for both Israel and Palestine based on the 1967 borders. President Ramaphosa encouraged the international community to demand a ceasefire, work towards a sustainable solution to the conflict, and stand on the side of peace, justice, and human rights for all. Without waiting for every country to align to resolve the conflict, the South African president expressed willingness to mediate the conflict between Israel and Palestine. In his statement, he stressed that South Africa is ready to collaborate with the international community and share its expertise in conflict resolution, drawing on its experience not only in the African continent, but also worldwide. This can be done because South Africa is a BRICS member, in which China and Russia reside. Both of these countries have also been advocates of a two-state solution to the conflict. Therefore, South Africa is in a better position to play its role as a peacemaker, neutralizing the US and the West's plan to worsen the conflict. Instead of assisting in peacemaking, the U.S. is sending military and financial aid to Israel worth $105 billion. This shows what the U.S. wants in this war. Ramaphosa called for an inclusive process to achieve a long-lasting and sustainable peace that would establish a viable Palestinian state coexisting peacefully with Israel. He advocated for this peace to be based on the 1967 internationally recognized borders, with East Jerusalem serving as the capital of the Palestinian state. The South African president also extended condolences to all the victims of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and urged for the immediate and unconditional opening of humanitarian corridors to provide essential assistance to those in need. He emphasized the urgency of ending the violence and alleviating human suffering in the region. The recent escalation of tensions in the Middle East can be traced back to Hamas's initiation of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood against Israel. This was in response to the storming of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in occupied East Jerusalem and the actions of Israeli settlers. In retaliation, the Israeli military launched Operation Swords of Iron, targeting Hamas in the Gaza Strip, leading to a significant escalation in the conflict. Protests related to the Israel-Hamas war have taken place in South Africa, with individuals from diverse backgrounds and nationalities coming together to express their viewpoints. Some protesters condemn both sides for the bombings and civilian casualties, while others aligned with specific positions related to the conflict. All over the world, pro-Palestine protests are being seen. You should know the South African government has criticized Israel's occupation, while U.S. President Joe Biden has characterized Hamas's actions as a terrorist assault against Israel. This shows that the world has divided on this conflict, and the only thing that matters is which side a country stands. But what is the two-state solution the South African president is talking about? The two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict offers the creation of an independent state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel, located west of the Jordan River. The precise boundary between these two states is a matter of ongoing dispute and negotiation. Palestinian and Arab leaders have consistently called for a complete Israeli withdrawal from the territories it occupied in 1967, a demand that Israel has rejected. The territory of the former Mandate Palestine, which includes West Jerusalem but is not part of the Palestinian state, would continue to be part of Israel. In 1947, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine, which proposed the division of the land into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem held under international control. However, this plan was not put into action. In 1974, a UN resolution called for two states, Israel and Palestine, side by side within secure and recognized borders, with the borders of the state of Palestine based on the pre-1967 borders. A more recent resolution in November 2013, which had a majority of support, endorsed this idea. However, Israel and the United States voted against it. The concept of a two-state solution has been supported by the Palestinian leadership since the 1982 Arab Summit in Fez. In 2017, even Hamas accepted the idea of a Palestinian state within the 1967 borders. However, Israel sees efforts by Palestinian leaders to gain international recognition of a state of Palestine as a unilateral action that is inconsistent with the negotiated two-state solution. Over time, there has been growing disillusionment with the two-state solution, with some polls indicating a decline in support for it. Diplomatic efforts to achieve a two-state solution date back to the 1991 Madrid Conference and include the 1993 Oslo Accords, the failed 2000 Camp David Summit, and the Taba negotiations in early 2001. In 2002, the Arab League proposed the Arab Peace Initiative, which was not successful. The latest initiative, the 2013-14 peace talks, also failed. Some experts now believe that the two-state solution is no longer achievable, and there is concern that a one-state reality like apartheid may be the outcome. Historically, partition plans were proposed in 1937 and 1947, with the latter endorsed by the Jewish leadership, but rejected by the Arab community in Palestine. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War and the 1949 Armistice Agreements shaped the map and led to the displacement of Palestinians. After the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, UN Resolution 242 called for Israeli withdrawal from occupied territories, which gave rise to the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. In 1974, the UN affirmed Palestinian rights, including self-determination, independence, and the right to return to their homes. But these were only false promises. In June 1976, there were Security Council resolutions that endorsed a two-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders. However, these resolutions were vetoed by the United States. While the U.S. supported a two-state solution, it argued that the borders should be negotiated directly by the parties involved. The idea of a two-state solution had substantial backing in the UN General Assembly since the mid-1970s. In 1988, the Palestinian Declaration of Independence indirectly recognized the State of Israel and expressed support for a two-state solution. This recognition was based on references to the UN Partition Plan of 1947 and UN resolutions since 1947. Later in 2017, Hamas introduced a charter that outlined the Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders. This represented a shift from their 1988 charter, which had called for a Palestinian state encompassing all of mandatory Palestine. But is the two-state solution feasible? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. By 2010, the ongoing expansion of settlements in the West Bank and the robust support for these settlements from the Israeli government had significantly reduced the available land and resources for a potential Palestinian state. This development led to doubts among both Palestinians and left-wing Israelis about the viability of a two-state solution. Later, on November 29, 2012, the UN General Assembly voted to recognize Palestine as a non-member observer state, with 138 votes in favor, 9 against, and 46 abstentions. The day after this vote, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced plans to build 3,000 new homes in an area referred to as E1, located to the east of East Jerusalem. This showed what Israel had planned to do, to never allow Palestinians to have a separate state. This decision faced criticism from various countries, including the United States. The Obama administration considered Israel's move counterproductive, and Australia expressed concerns that it could undermine the possibility of a two-state solution. The proposed E1 settlement was viewed as potentially dividing the territories under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian National Authority, as their authority did not extend to the River Jordan and the Dead Sea. In March 2015, Netanyahu declared that a Palestinian state would not be established during his tenure, although he also expressed disapproval of a one-state solution to the ongoing conflict. Now, as the conflict has become worse, a two-state solution is the only option. Whether it seems unfeasible, disliked by Israel, impractical, or impossible, every country knows that this is the only way out. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa addressed the media while wearing the traditional Palestinian scarf. He stated, "We stand here pledging our solidarity with the people of Palestine. We are deeply concerned about the unfolding atrocities in the Middle East, fully understanding that the people of Palestine, as recognized by many countries and leaders around the world, have endured nearly 75 years of occupation. South Africa, like other nations that have endured colonialism and occupation, such as India, has a historical track record of showing empathy for the Palestinian cause. The country established diplomatic relations with Palestine shortly after dismantling its own apartheid regime in 1990. South Africa's support for Palestine can be attributed to several factors. Firstly, South Africa's history of discrimination and disempowerment has made it particularly sensitive to the struggles of Palestinians under Israeli control. Iconic leaders like Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela have been strong advocates for Palestinian rights. Moreover, Israel has been perceived as a state propped up by Western support, and South Africa hasn't forgotten the West's complicity in sustaining apartheid. This history has led South Africa to align its position with Russia, which provided military training to those opposing the apartheid regime. Even though not many countries are condemning Israel's attack on Gaza, due to their economic dependency, South Africa stands with Palestinians. It's because South Africa's staunch support for Palestine is deeply rooted in the African National Congress' strong connections to anti-discrimination activism. Prominent ANC leaders and apartheid opponents have consistently drawn parallels between Israel's treatment of Palestinians and the oppression endured by Black South Africans under the white government. Furthermore, South Africa's commitment to its stance is driven by its resistance to a global perspective dominated by the West's position on important issues. This was evident when African nations faced pressure to align against Russia following its invasion of Ukraine, and South African Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, questioned why Western powers did not similarly condemn Israel. Earlier, South Africa downgraded its embassy in Israel to a liaison office, following its declaration the previous year that Israel should be classified as an apartheid state. Now, the resolution of this decades-long conflict seems to be the only option. It's because, since 1947, tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed by Israel's forces, further solidifying that creating a separate state for Palestinians is the only feasible option. In 2022, Israel's persistent policies of oppression and discrimination against Palestinians in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories were determined to constitute a system of apartheid under international law. Israeli officials were found to be responsible for the crime of apartheid. During a three-day offensive in August, Israeli forces engaged in what appeared to be war crimes in the occupied Gaza Strip. This escalated the impact of a 15-year-long Israeli blockade that amounted to illegal collective punishment and further divided Palestinian territory. Israel also heightened its crackdown on the freedom of association among Palestinians, imposed arbitrary restrictions on their freedom of movement, and enforced closures that effectively amounted to collective punishment, especially in the northern West Bank. Amnesty International reported that throughout 2022, there was an increase in the number of Palestinians unlawfully killed and seriously injured by Israeli forces during raids in the West Bank. Administrative detentions of Palestinians reached a 14-year high, and torture and other forms of ill treatment persisted. Israeli forces demolished the village of Al-Araqib in the Nakab for the 211th time. Additionally, 35 Palestinian Bedouin towns in Israel still lacked formal recognition, and their residents faced potential forced displacement. Authorities failed to process asylum claims for thousands of asylum seekers and imposed restrictions on their right to work. In July, the Israeli Supreme Court upheld a law that authorized the Interior Minister to revoke citizenship from individuals convicted of acts considered a breach of allegiance to the state. Since its enactment in 2008, this law has been applied exclusively against Palestinian citizens. But these were the norms before the recent conflict that erupted. After Hamas attacked Israel, the Israeli authorities vowed to make the war brutal, thus carrying out atrocities in Gaza. Amnesty International reported the devastating impact of Israel's aerial bombings on the people in Gaza. You should know that Gaza has been under Israel's illegal blockade for 16 years, effectively turning it into the world's largest open-air prison. Since October 7th, Israeli forces have launched thousands of air bombardments in Gaza, resulting in the deaths of over 3,793 people, the majority of whom were civilians, including over 1,500 children, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. More than 12,500 people have been injured, and tragically, over 1,000 bodies remain trapped under the rubble. Not only that, but Israel also targeted a hospital, killing hundreds of civilians. That comes under war crime. Pictures of children and babies ripped and torn could be seen, presenting a sight that humanity is to be blamed for. It is of utmost importance that the International Criminal Court's Office of the Prosecutor expedites its ongoing investigation into evidence of war crimes and other violations of international law by all parties involved. Without justice and the dismantlement of Israel's system of apartheid against Palestinians, the horrifying civilian suffering we are witnessing is likely to continue. The relentless bombardment of Gaza has brought unimaginable suffering to a population already facing a dire humanitarian crisis. After 16 years of Israel's illegal blockade, Gaza's healthcare system is on the brink of collapse, and its economy is in shambles. Hospitals are overwhelmed, unable to cope with the large number of injured people, and they desperately lack essential medication and equipment. During these dire circumstances, entire families have been wiped out. One heartbreaking example is the incident that occurred on October 7th when Israeli forces targeted a 3-story residential building in Gaza City's Al Zaytun neighborhood. 3 generations of the Aldos family were staying there, and the attack resulted in the tragic deaths of 15 family members, including 7 children. Among the victims were Auni and Ibtissam Aldos, along with their grandchildren Auni 12 and Ibtissam 17, as well as Adel and Ilham Aldos, and all 5 of their children. The youngest victim was just 18 months old. The killings, war crimes, and human rights violations will continue until countries sit together and assist in ending the conflict. With every passing second, brutalities are being carried out. That's why the South African president has directly called for ending the conflict and assisting in finding a permanent solution to this conflict. What do you think? whether African countries should pick a side in this conflict or stay neutral. Is presenting a solution that can end the conflict a better strategy? Let us know your thoughts on how the Israel-Hamas conflict can end. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.